Hey, this is Pastor Daniel speaking. One of the ways that you can improve your devotional life is by actually being intentional about what you're seeking in the biblical narrative that you're reading in your mornings or in the evening. One of the ways that I have found to be helpful for me is the Discovery Bible Study Method. So what is the Discovery Bible Study Method? The Discovery Bible Study Method involves you asking yourself 4 different questions when you're reading a biblical text. And those 4 questions are: what does this text tell me about God? What does this Bible text tell me about myself or human beings? What is this biblical text calling me to obey this week? Or others may say, what kingdom principle can I learn from this text? And finally, who can I share this with, right? Because we don't only read the Bible for ourselves, but we read it also to share it with other people. So today I just want to focus on that first question. What does this text tell me about God? So the first thing that I do is that I actually take my Bible and I read the biblical text twice, and I try to mark down every place where the word God appears in the text. The second thing I do is to ask myself 2 questions. What names of God, particular names of God, are being used in the text? And second, who is saying something about God in the text? This can actually lead to some interesting Bible studies. For example, in the book of Genesis, if you read through the story of Jacob and you look for all the places where the word God appears, you will notice that every time Jacob mentions the word God, he calls him the God of my father Isaac and Abraham. Jacob never says that God is his God. It's always the God of his father, Isaac, or his forefather, Abraham. It's interesting that we see at the culmination of his story in Genesis chapter 33, verse 20, when Jacob actually meets his brother Esau and reconciles with him after fighting with God the night before. We remember that Jacob's name was changed to Israel. And so at the culmination of that text, we find in Genesis chapter 33, verse 20, that Jacob calls God El Elohi Israel, which means God, the God of Israel, God, the God of Jacob himself. God moves away from being the God of his fathers to Israel or Jacob taking God as his own God. The principle that you can ask yourself is then, who is God to me? Is God the God of my fathers, the God of my ancestors, the God of my community, or is God my own God? And every time I read this text, I actually enjoy going back and saying, instead of saying El Elohi Israel, I say El Elohi Daniel, right? God, the God of Daniel. The second thing I want to do is not only to look at the names of God or the description of God in the text, but actually to ask myself, who is saying this about God? It could be that certain individuals in the text might say things that are truthful about God, whereas certain individuals in the text might say something that is not truthful about God. We remember in the book of Job, when God calls a council in heaven and asks all of the children of the different worlds to appear before him, that Satan shows up as the prince of this earth. He tells God, I have been roaming the earth, going to and fro, meaning I am the one in control. And God said, have you considered my servant Job? Satan says to God, well, Job only serves you because you're protecting him. And so God says, well, I will remove that protection from around him, and you can touch everything around him except his life. You cannot take his life away. Satan returns and begins to destroy all the possessions that Job had. Interestingly enough, we read in the story that Job's servants, when they are seeing his possessions are being destroyed, they run back to Job and report to him. So in Job chapter 1, verse 16, one of the servants tells Job, fire from God came from the sky and destroyed the sheep and the servants. This is interesting to know because we have seen the story before that it was not God who was destroying Job's possessions, but rather Satan, who was the one that was bringing the destruction upon the house of Job. So this lets me see already from the beginning of Scripture that many individuals believe that when they go through some form of loss in their life, God is the one to blame. So here we see there's not only important to see what the text is saying about God, but who is actually giving that information. For the person who may be given the information about God might not be saying something truthful about the character of God himself. So these are a few ways that you can maybe spice up your devotional time, your time that you spend with God. And hopefully as you engage in looking for these different places where God appears in the text, it might bring you some new revelation of who God is and may strengthen your spiritual walk with the Lord. I hope God blesses you, and I hope to hear from you soon how you've applied this to your own spiritual time with God.